Have you ever thought about how a major global conflict, something that really shaped a whole era, could get tangled up, maybe even undermined by a diplomatic relationship that looks like an alliance, but isn't quite? We're diving into some pretty tricky international waters today.
Yeah, for this deep dive, we are unraveling well, let's call it complicated relationship between the United States and Pakistan. It's often tense, sometimes cooperative. Our mission here is to look at the history, those moments of trust, and frankly, deep mistrust. And we want to pull out the key insights for you, the listener, especially about why this current warming of ties we're seeing, particularly under former President Trump's second term, starting in 2025, why that might be a risky move for U.S. interests. We're aiming to connect the dots on some surprising facts here.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how these historical patterns just seem to keep repeating. Because this isn't a simple story. It's not just allies or enemies. It's much more layered. Priorities diverge, and that leads to pretty significant consequences, especially when you look at the U.S. war on terror in Afghanistan. Okay, so let's unpack what's happening right now, this current moment. We're seeing reports, definite signs of warming ties between the U.S. and Pakistan again, specifically starting around March 2025 under former President Trump. He actually publicly praised Pakistan, didn't he, for capturing Sharifullah.
That's right. A key Islamic State figure linked to that horrific 2021 Kabul airport attack, the one where 13 American service members were killed.
And there was more, too. A White House lunch for Pakistan's army chief, Asim Munir.
Significant gestures.
Plus, Trump made a point of highlighting Pakistan's role in calming things down during that India-Pakistan clash in May 2025. So they helped avoid nuclear escalation.
And offers followed trade deals, access to rare earth minerals, things Pakistan certainly wants. It signals a real shift, or at least an attempted shift, in the U.S. approach. It's very much in line with Trump's, transactional view of foreign policy.
Transactional, yeah. Focus on the immediate win, like the Sharifullah capture.
Exactly. Prioritizing that perhaps over, let's say, digging into past grievances or long-term strategic consistency. He seems to see Pakistan as a potential partner, again, for counterterrorism, for regional stability, maybe a fresh start in his view.
But here's where it gets, well, really interesting and complicated. You look at the public conversation, especially online, say on X, and despite these friendly moves from the White House, there's just so much skepticism out there.
Oh, absolutely.
People pointing out, Pakistan got billions and billions in U.S. aid over the years.
Billions, while allegedly, at least, harboring terrorists like Osama bin Laden.
Right. So critics are asking, are we just rewarding a country that often worked against U.S. interests, especially in Afghanistan? It makes you wonder, how much has actually changed?
It's a fair question.
So let's set that against the backdrop of the U.S. war in Afghanistan. Launched after 9/11, clear goals. Take down al-Qaeda, kick out the Taliban, make sure Afghanistan couldn't be a terrorist haven again.
Right.
The cost, just staggering. Over $2 trillion spent.
$2 trillion.
2,459 American lives lost. Thousands more injured. And the outcome?
Well, failure, really. Failure to get lasting stability. And it all ended with the Taliban sweeping back into power in August 2021. A humiliating defeat, as many analysts called it.
And Pakistan's role in all this, it was central, but also deeply, deeply contradictory.
Absolutely central. I mean, think about it. Over $33 billion in U.S. aid since 2001. Military support, economic support, huge amounts. But even with all that aid, Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, and the military, they often seem to be playing their own game.
Their own agenda.
Precisely. Focused on influence in Afghanistan, focused on countering India. Those seem to be the priorities, often over the stated U.S. objectives.
And the evidence points to them providing safe havens, right, for the Taliban, other militants, directly undermining the U.S. war effort.
Yes. It's quite stark when you look at how their own regional priorities shape their actions, even when it conflicted with their role as a supposed U.S. ally.
And this isn't exactly new, this pattern of, let's call it double dealing. The U.S.-Pakistan relationship goes way back.
To the Cold War.
Right. In the 80s, Pakistan under General Zia-ul-Haq was a key U.S. ally against the Soviets in Afghanistan. They funneled support to the Mujahideen fighters.
And according to many analyses, that period really laid the groundwork, didn't it, for Pakistan's later support of Islamist groups.
Including the Taliban, who they later backed for, what was the term they used?
Strategic depth.
Strategic depth against India, basically wanting a friendly, controllable government next door.
Which then raises questions about their commitment after 9/11. Under General Musharraf, Pakistan did join the U.S. war on terror, yes, but under considerable pressure.
And the cooperation was Selective.
Very selective. They helped capture some al-Qaeda figures, yes, some high-profile ones. But, and this is crucial, they also continue to provide support, shelter to groups like the Afghan Taliban and the Haqqani Network.
Groups that were actively attacking U.S. and Afghan forces.
Exactly. Robert Gates, the former U.S. Defense Secretary, he wrote about it in his memoir, said Pakistan just wasn't a trustworthy ally.
Yet the U.S. was stuck, reliant on this Pakistani supply routes into Afghanistan.
Which really limited America's leverage. It was a fundamental dilemma.
Which brings us, I think, to the most explosive chapter in this whole story. Finding Osama bin Laden. In Abbottabad, in 2011.
I'd read, yeah.
I mean, the location itself is just astounding. A custom-built compound, high walls, secure, less than a mile from Pakistan's main military academy.
Less than a mile.
And the U.S. didn't tell Pakistan about the raid beforehand. Why? Because they were afraid Pakistan would tip bin Laden off.
A fear that, well, seemed validated by the raid's success, but it absolutely shattered relations, at least for a time.
And the timeline. Bin Laden had been living there for 6 years. 6 years. Settled there around 2005.
6 years. In Abbottabad.
It's almost unbelievable, like something out of a spy novel.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the implications were huge. There was a leaked Pakistani government report later that called it a great humiliation. It admitted there was either astonishing incompetence or, quote, possible complicity by the ISI, their own intelligence service.
Complicity.
Wow. Basically, the failure was so massive it suggested they either deliberately looked away or maybe even helped him.
And there were those WikiLeaks documents, too, alleging Pakistani intelligence might have warned bin Laden about U.S. operations before.
Right. Now, the official Pakistani investigation, perhaps unsurprisingly, found no direct proof of ISI complicity. But it still slammed the agency for an astonishing failure to find him.
Astonishing failure seems like an understatement.
Well, quite. And what's maybe even more damning, phone records connected bin Laden's courier, the guy who inadvertently led the U.S. to him, al-Kuwaiti.
Yeah.
Those records linked him to Harkat-ul-Mujahideen, an Islamist group known to be backed by the ISI.
Ah, so that suggests not just one rogue element, but maybe a wider environment where this could happen.
Exactly, a broader enabling environment for terrorism. It points towards something systemic. And, even though former President Musharraf called bin Laden's death a welcome act, publicly,
yes.
There's massive outrage in Pakistan. In the public, in the military, over the U.S. violating their sovereignty. It was a huge backlash.
Okay, so we've covered the history, the aid, the Haqqani network support, Abbottabad. Brings us back to today. Considering all that baggage, what are the real risks of President Trump's current approach? Why could this strategy be so costly for the U.S., according to the experts?
Well, the analyses we've seen point to about 5 main reasons this could really backfire. First, it simply risks rewarding unreliable behavior. Pakistan's history, supporting groups like the Taliban and Haqqani network while taking U.S. money, it strongly suggests their interests don't always align with America's.
So Trump's praise, the trade deals, it might just encourage more of the same. No real accountability.
That's the fear. It could embolden them to continue those dual policies. Second, it could undermine broader counterterrorism efforts. You see, Pakistan tends to focus its counterterrorism on groups that threaten them directly, like the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP.
Their domestic problem.
Right. But they often seem to turn a blind eye, or worse, towards groups targeting Afghanistan or India, like the Haqqani network. So Trump focusing on a narrow win, like capturing Sharifullah, might mean ignoring these bigger systemic issues.
Okay, what's the third risk?
Third, you risk straining regional alliances. Trump is engaging Pakistan again, but he also has close ties with India's Prime Minister Modi. That's a really tricky balancing act.
Because Pakistan sees India's influence in Afghanistan as a major threat. Decades of rivalry there.
Exactly. So if the U.S. tries to support both without very careful diplomacy, it could actually worsen tensions, like we saw a hint of in that May 2025 India-Pakistan clash. It could destabilize things further.
Makes sense. Number 4.
Fourth, potentially overlooking the domestic costs within Pakistan itself. The country faces huge internal challenges: political instability, economic problems, a resurgence of terrorism, like that Balochistan Liberation Army train hijacking in 2025. So Pakistan might naturally prioritize its own immediate security problems way above any U.S. interests. Aid, like that $400 million for F-16 maintenance, might not actually buy the cooperation the U.S. expects if Pakistan is just struggling to hold itself together.
Right, the aid might not translate into leverage.
Precisely. And finally, number 5, the risk of public and political backlash right here in the U.S.
Yeah, I can see that.
Trump's friendly approach could draw serious criticism from Congress, from the public.
Mhm.
People remember Abbottabad, they remember bin Laden.
And those ex-posts you mentioned, people haven't forgotten that Pakistan got billions while seemingly undermining U.S. efforts.
Exactly. So that could erode domestic support for Trump's foreign policy, even if he gets some short-term wins.
So if we connect this all back, step back and look at the big picture, that U.S. failure in Afghanistan, it wasn't just Pakistan's fault, obviously.
No, it was complex. Many factors.
But their actions, the safe havens, letting figures like bin Laden hide out for years, they played a massive role, didn't they? Basically ensuring the U.S. couldn't achieve a decisive victory.
A devastatingly significant role, yes. You could argue the Taliban's return in 2021 was, in many ways, enabled by decades of Pakistani support.
So the current strategy, focusing on short-term gains, maybe overlooking that long-term behavior pattern, is at the core issue.
That seems to be the central critique. Look, Pakistan did get off that FATF gray list in 2022. That's the financial watchdog group.
Right, for terrorist financing.
Yeah, but allegations about them supporting militants in Kashmir, for example, they haven't gone away. The U.S. probably does need Pakistan's cooperation for regional stability. It's a reality.
Good.
But without clear conditions, without demanding a real shift in behavior, the U.S. risks just repeating that same old cycle. Aid, followed by betrayal, followed by frustration.
So given all this, how should the U.S. approach this? How can they avoid repeating these costly mistakes? What do the sources suggest?
Well, the consensus among many analysts seems to lean towards a much more cautious conditional approach. First, link aid directly to verifiable results. Tie that military and economic support to concrete actions against all terrorist groups, not just the ones threatening Pakistan itself. Make it measurable.
Okay. Conditions. What else?
Second, really strengthen regional diplomacy. Actively work with India, work with Afghanistan, try to reduce those regional tensions and get everyone aligned on counterterrorism goals. Avoid that zero-sum game where one country's gain is seen as another's loss.
Makes sense. Diplomacy is key.
Third, enhance intelligence oversight. More scrutiny on Pakistan's ISI. Try to prevent leaks. Try to prevent that quiet support for militants that seems to keep happening.
Easier said than done, maybe, but essential.
Absolutely. And finally, maybe a longer-term play. Engage Pakistan's public. Try to counter some of that anti-U.S. sentiment by supporting civilian institutions, supporting development. Perhaps reducing the military's overwhelming dominance in the country could foster a more stable, maybe more transparent relationship down the line.
So let's bring this all together for you, the listener. Trump's current warming of relations with Pakistan. It looks pragmatic on the surface, right? Aimed at getting quick counterterrorism wins. But it carries these huge historical risks. Pakistan's track record sheltering bin Laden, supporting groups that killed Americans in Afghanistan, it shows a pattern of misleading its U.S. ally repeatedly.
Yeah, the big takeaway from the sources really seems to be this. The $33 billion in aid after 9/11, it didn't buy loyalty. It just didn't. And bin Laden hiding out in Abbottabad for years, that remains this incredibly powerful symbol of, well, betrayal.
So by pursuing this sort of pragmatic but maybe uncritical embrace now,
The risk is just falling back into those same old traps, repeating past errors. The consensus suggests a more balanced approach is needed, one that demands accountability, transparency, while still trying to foster cooperation where possible, not just transactional deals. That seems essential to avoid, frankly, being cheated again.
it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? In today's world, with global alliances always shifting, how do nations balance getting those short-term security wins against the weight of all that historical baggage in a relationship? What really stands out to you as the most surprising or maybe the most concerning part of this whole complex dynamic?